Eve gets what she wants. Adam agrees to separate. And Eve there's this interesting description of Eve before she is approached by Satan. She is described as Pomona, the Roman goddess of orchards, or fruit growing trees. Right? I don't think it's a coincidence that he chooses her. Fleeing from Vertumnus, the god of seasons and change, and he's also described her or compares her to Ceres, the goddess of um, agriculture, and I probably butchered those names, but forgive me. And then we find out that Satan has is following Eve through the garden and watches her. And by watching her in this kind of natural state, he's captivated by her beauty. And this kind of parallels his own kind of, we'll talk about it in a minute, but, and it's this he's her beauty kind of temporarily moves him into this brief moment of pure heart. He starts to question himself again of, do I need to corrupt this? Do I do the right thing? Do I have to be evil? And of course, that kind of back and forth adds to his complexity. As is he this we'll talk about in a second. But this comparison to of Eve to goddesses related to agriculture and organic growth are very interesting. One is that it's obvious, it's an obvious tie to that she is ostensibly going to work the land. But there's this greater level of complexity in the comparison to Pomona, who was tricked into marrying Vertumnus when he disguised himself as an old woman to enter her garden. And this directly mirrors Satan's disguising himself as an animal to enter Eden and corrupt. Vertumnus is the god of change. And Satan is an enactor of change in this situation. So we have again that emphasis on change of movement, of pivotal change. Also interesting, as I was saying, is this brief emotional kind of renaissance with Satan in his moment of goodness, and we are left to wonder whether his nature is purely evil, or if circumstances have molded him into something twisted. So then we have Satan's description, and where Eve is described as this thing of beauty, Satan is also described as this thing of beauty. He is not described as, I mean, when you think about snakes, you think of something slithering on the ground and gross and ugly and all that kind of thing, but at least I do because I don't like snakes. But Satan is not described as slithering on the ground. He is upright. He is eye level with Eve. And it puts them on the same level in a way, where they are able, he's better able to engage with her, being on her level. So his eyes are carbuncle. I don't know how to say that, but carbuncle, which is a reddish brown color. His neck is described as burnt gold. And he presents himself as a beautiful creature, and one that appears trusting to Eve. There are these allusions to people and places or stories that center on a serpent's inherent beauty and ability to charm, insinuating that Satan is one of those types of characters. And so his beauty, the fact that he comes in this form of a beautiful creature, is that it makes him non-threatening. It makes him more subtle. And notice that his approach is not direct. He gains her attention by making, or he tries to gain her attention by making pretty wreaths out of flowers with his tail, which I think goes back. We'll find out that Adam is also making wreaths for her, which I think is interesting, and I just thought about that now. But um, she doesn't notice him. She ignores him because she's used to the sounds of animals, because she's used to working in the forest and or the with a garden. And he finally gets her attention by licking the grass at her feet, and she sees him for the first time. And then finally, he begins to talk, and his fraudulent temptation begins. So I do want to notice that his kind of form is subtle because it's non-threatening, and his approach, this non-direct approach, is also subtle. So it goes back to that concept that it's hard to distinguish, and it looks or appears to be something that it is certainly not. So, anyways, after she sees the snake, Satan is able to kind of begin his temptation, and it takes a while for him to kind of build up to this kind of it's a process. And first he begins through flattery. He says, "Fairest resemblance of thy fair, or thy maker fair, thy celestial beauty adore." He graciously flatters her. He appeals to her vanity, and this I don't want to go into it, but in book 8, Eve is given the privilege of seeing herself in the pool of water. She's able to see her reflection, and of course, it's not vanity in the offset or at initial, because she has that kind of naivety, that innocence, that purity of her. It's not vanity, but it essentially becomes her vanity after on the fall. But anyways, he appeals to her, or tries to appeal to her vanity, and he compliments her extreme beauty while telling her not to question why a snake should be talking to her. She should be worshipped, goddess among gods, instead of just by one, Adam. So he begins by saying, you are better than what you have here. So Eve sees this snake, and she is taken not by his flattery. Um, she is taken by his ability to speak, and she describes this ability as a miracle. And because of this, because he has this ability to speak, he deserves her attention because he is special. This shows her mental acuity, or not mental acuity, by she notices or she's marks how well he speaks, but she doesn't note his ability to reason. And this passage really sets up, it's a setup for Satan to persuade Eve to eat from the tree. So we have this description of Satan's kind of first sales pitch on the fruit. He narrates how he began life like any other animal, with limitations when compared to man. He saw the tree of knowledge, whereupon the savory odor, blown grateful to appetite, more pleased his senses. He couldn't resist the temptation, and he eats from the tree. And through eating that fruit, he acquires these changes. He gets the ability to speak. He gets the ability to reason. And this makes him the envy of all of the other animals. And because he has this ability to contemplate all of the good and fair things in the world, it brings him to Eve. And that is what he decides to gaze upon and worship. So his sales pitch is that, he kind of goes on about how she is this kind of source of goodness, and it's another form of flattery. And she listens to him and she replies kind of sardonically, serpent, thy overpraising leaves in doubt the virtue of that fruit. But in spite of her kind of rejection of what he's just said, she wants to know where the tree is at because it's unknown to her. And again, it goes back to that kind of idea of knowledge versus ignorance, or this idea of things being unknown, kept in the dark. But the tree of knowledge is unknown to her because of the abundance of different trees. There are these vast amounts of luxuries of fruit that give the man luxury of choice. And Eve's use of the phrase, in such abundance lies our choice, she emphasizes the notion that man does in fact have a choice in which fruit to eat, which fits into the argument that man has the freedom to choose, or free will. So Satan leads Eve to the tree, and Eve says that the trip has been unnecessary because God has commanded that it not be eaten, and as his sole daughter, she must obey. That God has said, "Ye shall not eat thereof, not shall ye touch, lest ye will die." And so Eve recognizes this as the forbidden tree, and then Satan really starts to work his magic. And before he can begin this kind of temptation, the speaker describes the serpent to a great orator of old, because he is so eloquent and charismatic. The serpent's zeal and persuasiveness make his upcoming speech to Eve hard to resist, and his words convince her to trust him. And this description of the serpent's overall power is a way to take some of the blame off of Eve for falling into temptation, because it shows that the serpent enticed Eve and fooled her into doing what he wanted, which kind of deflects some of the responsibility for the fall from Eve. So he continues as this ancient orator. He says, "Don't believe what you have been told. Look at me. See how I've been rewarded, and I ate the fruit." He also says, God will praise you for your dauntless virtue. And then he goes into this kind of spiel about how good knowledge is. And if God could not be just if he punished you for seeking knowledge. And if he does punish you, if he is not just, then he is not God, and therefore he should not be feared. He said that God is forbidding you from gaining knowledge for evil motives, to keep you low and ignorant, to keep you his worshipers. And this is what Satan says to kind of confuse Eve, and he says that death may mean death to human life and putting on divine life. So death is not this bad thing. Death means that you will be divine in nature, and he really kind of twists the word meanings here, because death indeed does mean death, and not, I mean, she is in some ways divine here, but death is, he twists that kind of meaning of the word death. He says that because gods are first, they delude us that they have created the world. I question it, for this fair earth I see, warmed by the sun, producing every kind, them nothing. So basically he questions the ability of God to kind of create the world. And it's through this kind of reasoning and this manipulation of language, that this kind of final advertising pitch for the tree of knowledge, where the speaker tells us his words, too easy one entrance within her heart and mind. And this phrase makes Eve acceptance of his pitch almost too good to be true. In an almost ironic paradox, the miracle that Eve spoke of previously has been reciprocated, but this time in favor of Satan. So Eve's solitude and lack of reason is a miracle for Satan, in that he must only expend the bare minimum of energy to accomplish his intention. So essentially, it's been a miracle that he's gotten her alone, because all of this stuff has gotten to her. It was too easy. Meanwhile, Eve has been gazing upon this forbidden fruit. And the speaker doesn't just say that the fruit looked good, he goes so far as to describe it as a fruit which to behold might tempt alone. And again, it goes back to this idea that is the fruit enough to tempt Eve in and of its own? Is Satan necessary? There is also this kind of lesson of the burden of blame upon Eve when the speaker says that it's close to lunchtime and her eager appetite could have blurred her reason. And the speaker is also careful to include that Eve does not just spontaneously act upon her inclination to eat the fruit. Instead, she takes time to pause and mull over this whole situation in her head before making this life-changing decision. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to pick up right before Eve eats the fruit, and we'll finish finally. I know I said that I was going to finish up in my last one, but we'll finish up finally in the next video.